There we have it.
1 minute ago, Donald Trump just humiliated Prime Minister Keir Starmer on the world stage, and King Charles himself was left stunned. What started as a simple warning has exploded into Britain's most dangerous constitutional crisis in modern history. A foreign president, a furious monarch, and a collapsing government, all colliding in a way nobody ever thought possible. This isn't politics as usual. This is a full-scale earthquake that is ripping through Britain's foundations right now. The breaking point came when Trump unleashed a scathing statement directly aimed at Keir Starmer. His words weren't diplomatic, they weren't polite, they were designed to wound. In front of millions, Trump declared that Britain had betrayed its heroes while silencing free speech, and he demanded accountability not just from Starmer, but from the entire British establishment. The sting wasn't just in the message, but in the timing. Trump's statement came just as British voters were reeling from revelations that their government had spent over £1 billion on luxury hotel packages for illegal migrants, while thousands of war veterans slept rough in freezing streets. Trump didn't simply criticise, he exposed. He painted a picture so damning that it could not be ignored. Decorated soldiers begging for food, while migrants enjoyed heated pools, massages and premium meals, all funded by taxpayers. The contrast was brutal, and Starmer had no defence. Within minutes of Trump's address, markets trembled. American companies announced emergency reviews of their UK operations. Social media exploded with outrage, and the phrase "homes for heroes, not hotels for migrants" surged to the top of trending lists worldwide. But the real shock came not from Trump's words alone. It came from Buckingham Palace. For the first time in living memory, King Charles appeared visibly shaken as he delivered a speech at a veterans' charity event. His message was short but devastating. Those who serve this nation must come before all others. That single phrase, "before all others," sent shockwaves through Westminster. Political insiders immediately recognised it as a direct rebuke of Starmer's migrant policies, and the fact that the monarch's words aligned almost perfectly with Trump's warning made the blow even harsher. Britain's leader suddenly looked isolated, attacked from abroad, undermined at home, and abandoned by the very institution that was supposed to remain neutral. What happened next felt like history unfolding in real time. News cameras captured stunned faces across Parliament as MPs watched clips of Trump's speech replayed alongside the King's remarks. It was the perfect storm. A populist foreign president and a constitutional monarch inadvertently joining forces against a sitting Prime Minister. Crowds began forming outside Downing Street within hours, carrying signs that demanded immediate action on veteran homelessness. Videos of British heroes sleeping in doorways while migrants enjoyed spa treatment spread like wildfire online. Every repost, every hashtag, every viral clip pulled the crisis deeper into the public's consciousness. Starmer's government scrambled to regain control, but their carefully rehearsed talking points collapsed under the sheer weight of public fury. Starmer tried to argue that his policies were complicated and that Britain needed to balance compassion with responsibility. But nobody was listening anymore. The nation's focus had locked onto the brutal reality. Veterans who bled for their country were abandoned, while those who broke its laws were rewarded. Trump's words sharpened the anger. King Charles's intervention gave it moral authority, and the people turned that anger into unstoppable momentum. Inside Westminster, whispers began spreading. Could Starmer even survive this? Could Britain's leader endure a moment where a foreign president and his own monarch had aligned against him? The answer, whispered in corridors and shouted in protest chants, was becoming clear. His time might be running out. As the fallout deepened, Britain's political system began to buckle under pressure. What should have been a normal week in Westminster transformed into chaos on a scale unseen in decades. Starmer's ministers entered cabinet meetings visibly shaken, their nerves shredded by furious calls from constituents and panicked investors. Inside those closed doors, shouting matches erupted. Defence Secretary John Healey, normally composed, reportedly slammed his fist against the table, demanding that the government act immediately to address veteran homelessness. Other ministers whispered warnings. If we don't fix this now, we're finished. But the truth was already clear. The crisis had grown beyond their control. On the streets, the anger turned physical. Protesters filled Westminster Square, Trafalgar Square and Parliament Square with banners that read "Veterans First" and "Stop Betraying Our Heroes." These were not small, fringe demonstrations, and they were massive, with ordinary families, military veterans in wheelchairs, active duty soldiers on leave, and working-class citizens who felt betrayed. The chant, "Homes for Heroes, not hotels for migrants," echoed through the heart of London like a war drum. Police attempted to contain the swelling crowds, but the sheer numbers forced entire sections of the city to shut down. Westminster Bridge was closed as waves of protesters surged across, demanding to be heard. Social media live streams captured every moment, sending images of the chaos into millions of homes worldwide. The power of those visuals was devastating. Videos showed veterans clutching medals as they stood outside luxury hotels filled with migrants. Others showed mothers holding photographs of sons who had died in Iraq or Afghanistan, crying as they begged the government to honour their sacrifice. TikTok feeds were flooded with split-screen comparisons. Lavish hotel dining rooms on one side, veterans huddled in the rain on the other. The anger wasn't confined to Britain. Across the Atlantic, American audiences watched with disbelief as Trump's warnings were vindicated in real time. US commentators tore into Starmer's leadership, with headlines declaring Britain a nation without loyalty and a government without honour. The economic consequences hit just as hard. Within 48 hours of Trump's attack, American companies began quietly pulling investments from the UK. Google shifted jobs to Ireland. Microsoft moved operations to Germany. Amazon prepared to transfer data centres to Amsterdam. The financial markets reacted violently. The FTSE 100 plunged. The pound collapsed to 6-month lows and foreign investors began fleeing. British Treasury officials scrambled, holding emergency meetings late into the night, but the panic only deepened. Chancellor Rachel Reeves admitted privately that Britain's financial credibility was evaporating. The idea that Britain could lose its special economic relationship with the United States, once unthinkable, was now openly discussed in boardrooms and trading floors alike. Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, King Charles's words reverberated across the nation. His speech at the Veterans Gala, short, sharp and impossibly powerful by turns, became the subject of feverish debate. Royal watchers admitted that never in modern history had a monarch spoken so directly against a sitting prime minister. The phrase, "before all others," was dissected on television panels and splashed across newspapers. To the public, it wasn't just a statement, it was a royal judgment. By aligning himself with the plight of homeless veterans, Charles placed moral pressure directly on Starmer's shoulders. The symbolism was impossible to miss. The crown itself had spoken, and it had spoken against the government. This collision of forces, Trump's fury, the King's intervention, the people's outrage and the market's rejection, created the perfect storm. Starmer stood at the centre of it, looking increasingly like a man out of his depth. During Prime Minister's questions, his attempts to defend himself collapsed under the weight of ridicule. Conservative MPs waved photographs of homeless veterans. Labour backbenchers sat in stony silence, terrified of being associated with policies now seen as political poison. Opposition leader Rishi Sunak delivered a brutal attack line. When your monarch has more moral clarity than your prime minister, the time for excuses is over. The chamber erupted. Cameras captured Starmer's face, pale and shaken, as he fumbled through his notes. By the end of the week, whispers had turned into open revolt. Senior Labour MPs began discussing whether Starmer could survive the crisis at all. Some called privately for him to step down for the good of the party. Others urged an immediate policy reversal, but it was too late. Once the king had spoken, once Trump had humiliated him, and once the people had taken to the streets, the damage was permanent. The third day of the crisis was unlike anything Britain had seen in generations. Westminster resembled a fortress under siege, with barricades erected to hold back swelling protests that showed no sign of slowing. Crowds of veterans, families and furious citizens camped outside Parliament, refusing to leave until the government addressed what they called the ultimate betrayal. The chant, Homes for Heroes, thundered through the city, drowning out Starmer's every attempt to speak. Television broadcasts carried images of veterans in wheelchairs lined up outside luxury hotels, their medals glinting under grey skies as they demanded answers. The message was simple, raw and impossible to ignore. Britain had turned its back on those who defended it. Inside Parliament, the situation deteriorated further. Prime Minister's questions had already humiliated Starmer, but the backlash escalated when Conservative MP Sarah Henderson held up a photograph of James Patterson, the Royal Marine who had been found sleeping in a cardboard box outside a McDonald's. She demanded to know why the government had chosen to fine American companies for harmful speech while spending £1.2 billion housing migrants in four-star hotels. The chamber went silent as Henderson's voice cracked with emotion. Why is this war hero abandoned in the streets while those who broke our laws enjoy spa treatments? She asked. Starmer, visibly shaken, tried to shuffle through his notes, but no prepared line could withstand the moral weight of the question. His stammering response was broadcast live, replayed endlessly across social media and dissected by pundits who declared it the most disastrous performance of his career. The opposition seized the moment. Rishi Sunak delivered the knockout blow with a line that spread across the internet within minutes. When even your monarch has more moral courage than your Prime Minister, your time is finished. The words landed like a hammer strike. Clips of Sunak's speech hit millions of views in hours. Commentators called it a political death sentence. Even Labour backbenchers, many of whom had once stood loyally behind Starmer, began breaking ranks. Within 24 hours, more than 40 members of Parliament signed a letter demanding an immediate review of the migrant hotel programme. Some went further, openly calling for Starmer to resign. What had started as a scandal was mutating into a full-blown leadership crisis. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Trump was not finished. In a televised interview watched by tens of millions, he doubled down, declaring Britain's government a disgrace to its heroes. He warned that unless veterans were prioritised and free speech restored, America would rethink its entire relationship with Britain. For decades, the so-called special relationship between the UK and the United States had been untouchable. Now Trump was threatening to rip it apart, and he wasn't bluffing. Within hours, BlackRock, Vanguard and several major American pension funds began withdrawing billions from British markets. The pound plunged again, reaching its lowest value against the dollar in over a year. British tech stocks collapsed. Analysts warned that London's position as Europe's financial capital was on the verge of slipping away to Dublin, Amsterdam or Frankfurt. And the crisis wasn't just political anymore, it was existential. Through it all, King Charles remained silent after his explosive remark. But that silence carried more weight than words. Every news outlet replayed his before all others speech on a loop. Royal insiders revealed that the king had been privately funding emergency shelters for veterans using his own personal fortune to provide warm beds and hot meals for those left behind by the state. The contrast was devastating. The monarch acted, the Prime Minister stalled, and the people noticed. For the first time in living memory, ordinary citizens began openly chanting the King's name at protests. To many, Charles had become the moral leader of the nation, a symbolic protector of Britain's forgotten heroes, and while Starmer was painted as the villain who abandoned them. By the end of the week, the walls of Downing Street felt like they were closing in. Leaks from inside cabinet revealed desperation and infighting. Ministers were described as planning their escape routes from Starmer's sinking administration. Senior Labour figures discussed whether the Prime Minister could even survive until the next election. Some whispered about replacing him within weeks to stop the bleeding. Polls confirmed their fears. Labour's numbers plummeted to their lowest levels since 2019, while Nigel Farage's Reform UK surged in working-class constituencies, feeding off the anger like fuel to a fire. Britain wasn't just watching a Prime Minister stumble. By the seventh day, Britain was no longer just in political turmoil. It was in open revolt. The protests that had begun as scattered demonstrations transformed into a nationwide uprising. From Manchester to Birmingham, from Glasgow to Cardiff, ordinary citizens joined veterans and families in the streets. The images were unmissable. Wheelchairs rolling side by side with banners, mothers clutching folded Union Jack flags of sons who never came home, and thousands chanting the same refrain, "Homes for heroes." Traffic in central London was paralysed. Parliament Square became a sea of flags, placards and fury. Even the police, many of them veterans themselves, struggled to contain the emotion of the crowds they were ordered to control. Officers were filmed shaking hands with protesters, whispering their support and in some cases removing their helmets in silent solidarity. The government had lost not just credibility, it had lost moral authority. The media, once hesitant to criticise Starmer, abandoned neutrality. Tabloids plastered their front pages with devastating headlines. "Betrayal of Britain's bravest," screamed The Sun. The Daily Mail ran with "luxury hotels for migrants, cardboard boxes for heroes." Even traditionally Labour-friendly outlets turned, publishing op-eds demanding urgent action. The BBC replayed emotional interviews with veterans who described sleeping in freezing conditions, their service medals clinking as they held paper cups for spare change. The contrast was unbearable, and it was everywhere. TikTok videos with millions of views showed split screens, hotel spa treatments beside shivering soldiers wrapped in damp blankets. Instagram reels exploded with clips of King Charles declaring veterans must come before all others. Twitter and Facebook were flooded with hashtags like #VeteransFirst and #StarmerMustGo. Meanwhile, the international backlash deepened. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese openly questioned Britain's judgment, declaring, "If a government cannot care for its veterans, what does it stand for?" Canada's Foreign Minister echoed the sentiment, warning that Britain's treatment of its heroes undermines its credibility on the world stage. The New York Times ran a brutal headline: "Britain betrays its warriors while silencing free speech." The Wall Street Journal called it a humiliation of historic proportions. Every major US network covered the scandal as if it were their own, framing Trump's intervention as a moral victory over Starmer. The message was clear. Britain was no longer leading. It was floundering. The economic fallout became catastrophic. American pension funds accelerated their withdrawal from British markets, draining billions in just days. Tesla suspended plans for a battery factory in the Midlands. Apple relocated content operations to Ireland. Netflix shifted production facilities to Amsterdam. Economists warned that Britain was on the verge of losing its position as Europe's financial hub. The pound fell further, triggering fears of inflation spikes and higher living costs for ordinary families already struggling. What had begun as a political scandal now threatened to push the nation into financial crisis. Inside the Treasury, officials admitted the situation was spiralling beyond repair. One insider described it as watching a slow-motion collapse of Britain's credibility. Inside Parliament, the knives were out. More than 60 Labour MPs signed a letter urging Starmer to resign. Cabinet ministers who had stood by him for years began to distance themselves publicly. Former allies now spoke in hushed tones about the good of the party and survival of the government. Starmer's inner circle shrank by the hour, as even loyal aides questioned whether he could continue. During a closed-door meeting, one senior MP bluntly told him, "The king is against you. Trump has destroyed you and the people will never forgive you. Your position is untenable." The words stung because they were true, and yet Starmer refused to budge. He appeared on television insisting he would see this crisis through, his voice strained and his face pale. But the performance fooled no one. The camera showed a man beaten down, out of energy, and utterly alone. Every time he spoke, clips of veterans sleeping in the cold drowned out his message online. Every denial he gave was met with another leaked document, another viral video, another speech from an opposition MP tearing him apart. His credibility was evaporating in real time, and everyone knew it. At the same time, whispers grew louder that the king might make another move. Palace insiders revealed Charles was deeply troubled by the government's inaction and was considering a more direct appeal. Constitutional experts warned that if the monarch spoke again, it would cross a line unseen in modern British history, a monarch actively intervening against his own prime minister.